Many of us spend our whole life in search of purpose, desperately seeking meaningful ways to make a difference in the world with the short amount of time we are given. The Deploying High podcast has been designed to help you analyze what gives you purpose.
Hello there. You're listening to Deploying High. I'm Chief Gene Saunders, the founder and CEO of Project Lifesaver International. Today, I've got a good friend of mine that is going to be our guest, and been looking forward to our conversation with him. I met him back in 2003 when I trained his sheriff's office in Project Lifesaver. And since that time, apparently it piqued his interest, and he has really taken off in the areas of autism and Alzheimer's, becoming very active as an instructor and a mentor to a lot of different people and organizations. So it's my pleasure today to introduce to you Sergeant Tim Sutton with the Hanover County, Virginia Sheriff's Office. Hey, Tim.
How you doing, Chief? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, well, listen, thank you for being here. Really, it's been a while since we talked. I think the last time we talked was I was fortunate enough to be a guest on your podcast.
Right.
So, but how have things been going?
Things been going real well. Things are taking off here in the Richmond area, and we're getting the word out about autism, Alzheimer's, and understanding the behaviors and how to interact and have positive encounters with individuals who are dealing with disabilities.
It's always been a curiosity of mine. We went and trained, got you into Project Lifesaver. What caused you to really want to go even further with your activities and what you were doing with it?
Well, Project Lifesaver was the birth. I guess that was where the seed was planted. And, I learned a little bit through your courses about autism, Alzheimer's, other forms of dementia, and other intellectual disabilities. And part of your program that you started was going out and meeting these families and dealing with the wandering issue, the elopement issue, and placing those transmitters on the clients to just keep them safe in case they were to get away from the caregiver or parents. And as I started meeting a lot of the families, I came to realization that obviously the wandering and elopement was an issue, but I noticed that they were dealing with a lot of other issues that people really didn't understand, and specifically public safety. And the interesting part was you and I know Joanna Frank. Matthew Frank was the first child I interacted with Project Lifesaver. And what really struck me was the first time I met that family. He was 6 years old. And when I walked into the house in uniform, the first thing Matthew did was walk up and put his hand on my weapon. And we kept telling, me and Mom were telling him, no, Matthew, don't do that. And then he would come up and lean against it. And he was obviously fixated on that weapon on my side. And I was sitting there talking to Joanna and Keith, the parents, at the kitchen table, and felt something underneath my chair and looked down, and Matthew was laying on the floor, and he had his finger up the barrel of my weapon. And what really got me was the fact that autism and some of your disabilities out there are invisible disabilities, because unless there's an underlying circumstance, that person looks no different than anybody else. And for some reason, I just, in my mind, bumped it ahead 20, 25 years and thought, okay, well, if Matthew's out there in public looking no different than anybody else, and I'm standing in Walmart or standing somewhere in uniform, and he comes over and grabs my weapon, my original thought is I'm being assaulted. Somebody's trying to take my weapon. And if I grab hold of him, and with autism being sensory driven, it may hurt him just to have me touch him. And he's going to react. If it feels like razor blades are cutting through his skin because of his sensory issues, I'm in for a huge fight. And there's so many other elements of autism that would make that situation even worse. But without any training, I'm interpreting it as assault on a law enforcement officer, resisting arrest. And, law enforcement, we have the tools that hurt people and take lives. And you can see how that would escalate potentially to where somebody gets hurt. And I thought, people need to understand, because you don't know what you don't know. If you haven't been taught these things, you're going to revert back to the training that you received. But if we can incorporate this into some training, maybe people will get a better understanding of the disabilities and the sensory issues.
And I think that is really commendable of you because I remember back in 2003 when, we interacted with the training, there wasn't much out there as far as law enforcement and learning about autism.
Right.
And I have said on this broadcast several times, at one point, law enforcement's entire training syllabus on disabilities and cognitive issues was under the heading of dealing with mental retardation.
Right.
And it was a 1-hour block of training.
Right.
Which probably really didn't tell you much of anything. Not that I remember anyway.
Right.
And when I became chief of training is when I started to see a little bit of a shift, especially in the Alzheimer's field.
Right.
But not so much in autism. When we trained you guys in 2003, we had just started in the autism field, if you remember.
Yeah.
And at that time, doing some research, when I looked at it, the stats, because I knew, just like you and the rest of us didn't know anything about it,
right.
The statistics were then 1 in 10,000. So what are they now, Tim?
According to the CDC, it's 1 in every 54 births, and males are actually 4 times more likely to have autism than females.
So look how far that's come just since, you did your initial training in
Right.
Project Lifesaver. And I might remind some of our listeners and some that are viewing, one of the most iconic pictures that Project Lifesaver has ever had or been able to use was a picture of Tim Sutton with the child on his lap with his Stetson on, which I thought, we felt, and I thought at that time, that told the whole story right there. And I think that it did. It did. It really kind of got to the heartstrings and showed law enforcement what could be done.
And that picture itself, we had no idea. We knew they were going to take pictures. They were doing a newspaper article, but at that point, we didn't know that they were actually taking pictures. And it wasn't staged or anything, but I always tell people that's the shot heard around the world because I had heard so many things from, gotten calls from all over the country actually asking about that picture and asking about Project Lifesaver. But it's the pure embodiment, I think, of Project Lifesaver. And I've told you before, it's great to be able to go out and search for people if, when and if they go missing and bring them back to their loved ones. Because in law enforcement, you can lock up every bad guy, you can lock up every, drunk driver. But when a mom or dad or a caregiver don't expect to ever see their loved one again, and you walk through the door with them, there's no feeling that matches that. And a big part of it is the relationships that we are able to build with those families and those individuals.
And you're exactly right. I mean, and I think you heard us say in the training about the feeling you get when you carry them home, just the reaction of the family
right
to the whole situation and the fact that they're back home safely. So in your Project Lifesaver program and even in your teaching program, what are some of the obstacles that you've run into over the years in being able to move forward?
The obstacles I've run across are pretty much, number one is getting the families to reach out and disclose information. Even if they're not in Project Lifesaver, to have them get in touch with their local law enforcement, public safety agency, and disclose the information where they can put it in the CAD system, the computer system. So if officers have to come out, firefighters, EMTs have to come out to their residents to deal with the situation. If they have to call 911, it's a crisis already. But to have a child or family member who is overstimulated or has issue with sirens, bright flashing lights and things, that's the information we know, regardless of the wandering and elopement issue. But we need the families to reach out and share that information with us so we can get there. We can go out there and deal with situations, but the number one goal in our job should be to do our jobs effectively. And that's making it so everybody goes home safely, the officers, the families. But that's been a huge obstacle, is just getting them to disclose the information. And, as far as the public safety, what I would like to see is mandated training on autism and Alzheimer's. Yeah, like you said earlier, the mental issue, there is tons of training in the mental health area. And sometimes people lump, autism as well as Alzheimer's, dementia into that mental health area. And you may hear the word, you don't hear a description or get any information on the disorder or disease, but it's classified as a mental health issue in training terms, but it's neither one are a mental health issue. Alzheimer's is an actual disease, which I learned from Project Lifesaver training. Originally, dementia, it's a symptom of some other issue, Parkinson's, or, there's so many things that can cause dementias. And autism is not a mental health disorder. It is a cognitive disorder where their brain is wired differently. However, people with autism, Alzheimer's, may have mental health problems, but to be able to pull that out of the mental health aspect and train officers to understand those behaviors. So hopefully when they respond, if they don't already know that somebody has autism, maybe they can pick up on a behavior that I've told them about, the stemming or something, lack of eye contact, to realize, okay, well, this may be what I'm dealing with. I'm going to keep myself safe. Officer safety is paramount. But like I said before, you don't know what you don't know. If you haven't been trained to understand those behaviors and how to not make them worse, then it's easy to go in there and do the wrong thing. So I think just the basic obstacle has been the, not people looking at the training going, oh, it's not necessary for our officers. And unfortunately, what promotes the training to happen ends up being an unfortunate situation. And then you're playing catch up. Oh, we did this. We had this encounter. It went bad. There's a lawsuit or something. And then they decide, okay, we need to train our officers now. I'm trying to get out there before that happens and have officers trained.
And that's commendable, Barry. And just comment on a couple of things you said. I still see the deniability as a big factor. And I think it's for the same reasons that I saw 23 years ago. Families, or not all, but many families, look at what they're dealing with as some kind of stigma.
Yes.
Or some kind of, this is going to look bad on the family, which is just another way of saying a stigma. And
Yes.
that goes for Alzheimer's and autism, or any of these kind of cognitive or issues, which somebody and some people may say, well, that's not normal. Well, what is normal when you start talking about people? What is normal?
Yeah.
I'd like for somebody to give me a clear, concise definition. And the other thing is the training aspect. And we run into this in Project Lifesaver. We'll have citizens that will come to us, but we really need this in our community. So I ask them, because we have found that departments will adopt it quicker if it comes from the community rather than coming from us.
Right.
Because we don't want to be seen as some kind of vendor that's out there just wanting to sell you something, because we're not.
Right.
And what I really see is the same thing you mentioned. We have, higher ups in public safety agencies that for some reason decide, well, this is not really necessary. Well, my question to them is, have you really looked at what's been going on within your department and your agency in the past couple of years, and the dealings and the people that they've had to interact with?
Right.
Because I think a lot of and I hate to say it, but I'm not, an active cop anymore. So I'll say a lot of chiefs and sheriffs sit in an ivory tower, and they leave everything to their chief deputy or their assistant chief. Well, this is a bad attitude, because then when the populace comes in and says, we really would like to have this, we really need this, then if the chief has any interest at all, they've got to go back and do some research. And a lot of them just brush it off. But I think in this day and time, and when I think back, and I'm going to ask you, in your public safety or your police career, before you became involved with autism or Alzheimer's, can you think of situations that you encountered that you now believe were exactly those?
Oh, definitely. And I always use that when I teach classes, because, law enforcement cops are a very difficult crowd to teach, because
Amen.
Our job is so unique. It's different. And, and many times I have to tell people, look, to get in front of a class of police officers to teach them, you really need to have had that experience or currently be an officer. And I've got a lot of moms teach with me, and I'm like, look, having me up there in the front of that class adds credibility to you in their eyes. But I love, I've been to so many classes where I walk in and they've seen it on the syllabus, what we're teaching, and you can tell they don't want to be there. Mm-hmm. They're thinking, I've got to sit and listen to this all day. And I ask them how many people were wanted to come to the class, and I may get one hand out of 50. And I say, how many of you were voluntold to come to this class? And that's pretty much everybody else. And I tell them, you're going to be amazed at the end of the day. And it's neat to see the progress during the day, because officers start thinking, wait a minute, I went on that call and I dealt with that kid or that adult. This is what I was dealing with, and I had no idea. And you get done with the class, and I have officers coming up to me, 25, 30 years of experience, saying, this is the best class I've ever had. And, like you said, you alluded to that ivory tower. That's who needs to hear the information. And I've actually been working with the training company out of New Hampshire, the Training Response Network. And I've actually been in studio and shot a 3-hour autism video. And the company has been sending me to do classes. I went to Bristol up here at the Virginia-Tennessee line back in October to train 25 chiefs and sheriffs, because they are the ones that need to hear it and buy into it. And then they can actually go and purchase the online training for their officers, so they don't have to pull them off the road. They can do the training, the 3-hour training on their computers. But yeah, we've got to get the information to the ones up top and make sure they see it as important. Otherwise, we're just going to be chasing our tail. We're going to go out there and train officers, but to be able to get the lump sum and make sure more officers are trained, we need to get the information. We need to let the higher ups know what's going on, because that's how it's going to happen in the agencies. Once the chief or sheriff buys into it, sees it as important, and I think I can, make them see how important it is and how they don't want an unfortunate situation with their agency where they're having to answer questions afterwards. It's just getting to them and making sure that they know how important it is, and then hopefully they can push the training towards all their officers.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I know I have spoken at the National Sheriff's Association and the IACP, which is International Association of Chiefs of Police, for you that don't know what it is. And it's amazing the revelation that some of them have after you get in there and you talk to them. And usually when I talk to them, I don't talk a lot about what Project Lifesaver does, but I talk more about the situation with autism and Alzheimer's.
Right.
And how many other cognitive disorders and dementias are out there that they never thought about. And they do, many of them, do the same things that what you just alluded to. It's like the light bulb went off.
Right.
And back in their career, oh yeah, I dealt with that. And the problem that we try to get across to them is these problems are not diminishing. Mm-hmm. These problems are getting bigger. The populations are getting bigger. And I go back to, all right, 1 in 10,000 versus 1 in 54. What does that tell you? Hey, get it through here. This thing is not going away, and there's no cure because we don't know what causes it.
And it's not a question of if you're going to have an encounter or an interaction. Question's when. When is it going to happen?
Absolutely.
And are you going to be prepared for it?
Well, even in some of these smaller departments, you talked about Bristol. Even in some of the smaller departments, the 5 or 10 man departments, they don't live in a cocoon like they think some of them do.
Right.
It's not Mayberry, guys. You better be thinking about this family is going to move in or something's going to develop, and now you're going to have to deal with it, and you don't know how. Right. And it only takes one incident. One, and I hate to put it on a viewpoint of how bad it makes your department look in the press.
Right.
But it does. All you got to do is have a bad reaction. And we've heard all about them. I mean, look at the lessons learned in autism on how to deal with autistic children or autistic adults and positioning them. Yeah, and I know you know what I'm talking about as far as laying them on their stomach.
Right.
Those kind of things.
the Ethan Saylor case. I mean, and that was an individual who had Down syndrome where you could look and see that there was something different. It wasn't an invisible disability. But a lot of that's happened, and it's knowing some of that many times people with disabilities, specifically autism, are hypotonic, where their muscles are not fully developed, and specifically in the chest area. And should you have to take them into custody and they're laying face down on the ground, you're trying to catch your breath, but they're not able to because of the muscles not being fully developed. So it's knowing these little things. You may have to restrain somebody with autism, but you need to do that stuff with knowledge.
Exactly.
You need to understand what it's all about. And Chief, you talk about these rural areas with 10 officers. I think we're all law enforcement. We're all sworn about the same, that we're sworn to protect all populations, not this population, that population. It's everybody. So why not understand that population that you're trying, all populations that you're trying to protect? Well,
and I hate to go back to the statement I made earlier, because that is an area that could really bite you if you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
So anyway, Tim, I'm going to throw a curveball to you now. And I know, we didn't discuss this before we started, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I know you can handle it. A lot's going on now about law enforcement or first responder PTSD. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but here in St. Lucie County, we just had 2 deputies in a double suicide.
Wow.
And over in Hillsborough County, we had a murder-suicide of 2 deputies. So we're seeing these things kind of increase and go not in a way that we really want to see them go.
Right.
But let me ask you this. What have you seen as far as first responder PTSD? And I know you're going to have to go back into your mental archives here.
Right.
But when I think about it, I have seen it. I just didn't know what it was at the time. And I honestly think, and I hate to say this, and you may or may not agree with me, I think any of us that have been in law enforcement for any amount of time do have a little PTSD. We may not recognize it. It may not be in the forefront, right, but I think it does affect us. And I would be the first one to say that in my particular case, I am much more prone to being emotional now than I ever was when I was on active duty.
Right.
Because, as you know, we suppress our feelings. We learn to deal with these situations and not think about it and suppress it.
Right.
Well, I think we've learned that only goes so far. So, yeah, am I the one that will cry at a sad movie? Oh, absolutely anymore.
Right.
And I think that's part of what's happened to me. So what are your thoughts on this situation? You've been around law enforcement for a while, and I
think it's a box that's opening, and people and officers are actually, I hear them talking and they're concerned. And that's one thing I try to do with my officers when we have a situation. It doesn't have to be an officer involved shooting or anything like that, but sometimes to bring them in and sit down and just talk about the call for service. Okay, what did we do? Why did we do it? Could we have done it better? And let them vent and get some information out. But I don't even think you're aware, but, and it's interesting that you bring this up. Everybody's been listening to the news. I've got twin daughters who are freshmen at Bridgewater College.
Oh, yeah, I know about the incident at Bridgewater.
And last Tuesday, I got 2 texts from my daughters. I love you. Active shooter, we're hiding, from both of my daughters. And I tried to call one of my daughters and she didn't answer. And I called the second one, she picked up and she was crying. And then I heard a thump and the phone went dead. So I was on the way to Bridgewater. And we got up there and they were okay. But finally, the situation had been under containment. I mean, the shooter was on the way to hospital. The 2 officers were down. And we waited and waited and waited for them to end the lockdown. So as soon as my daughter showed up, they started crying. And we hugged them and loved on them. My daughter actually just wrote a story from one of her classes yesterday and posted it on Facebook about what she went through. And this is what you talk about crying in the movie. I found out that they are going to the funeral. They're having it up at James Madison University tomorrow. And I'm going with some officers in uniform up there tomorrow. And I asked my daughters, I said, I don't know what they're going to do as far as seating, but I want to sit with you all. I want to sit with the two of you. And when I'm there, I'm probably going to be crying. And I accept that. But it was a very emotional thing for my daughters to go through. But sometimes we just need to let it out. We can't sit there and compartmentalize everything that we deal with every day. I feel like I've done that a lot over my career. It's going on 33 years. And I really haven't had terrible, nightmares or I don't feel like I've had terrible mental health issues. But I think last Tuesday woke me up to, oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of this. My kids are involved. And I cannot wait to get up there tomorrow and see them again. But I want to sit with my daughters during this service and hold their hand during this service. And yes, I will probably cry my eyes out. And it is what it is. If people see that happen, they're going to see it happen. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. And I think every officer who goes through these situations, difficult situations, and dealing with PTSD, you need to talk. You need to share that information with people. You need to ask for help. And that's difficult in our line of work, to humble yourself, because we're out there solving everybody else's problems. And we're not supposed to have problems, in the public's eyes. But sometimes we just need to let it out. We need somebody to understand what we're dealing with. And that's where you have to rely on the guys and girls that you work with and seek that help when you need it.
Truer words were never spoken, because I think a lot of the hierarchy, and I hate to go back to the brass, are not recognizing this as they should. But a lot are, a lot of them now are having counseling after incidents that are involving officers. I know when I headed the SWAT team, we had a team psychologist.
Right.
And often we would, in fact, every 3 months we had to go before him.
Right.
And just talk. And I think that helped me a lot. And he kind of analyzed us and told us, our strengths and our weaknesses. And I think that was very, very helpful, and may have kept me from having more of a reaction.
Right.
And when you're talking about dealing with your family, I think that's when a lot of the emotions and stuff come out. When all this stuff that you have dealt with other families and other situations now are in your family. Right. I'll never forget. And my son had been taken to the emergency room with a bad cut on his forehead. And I got called and I responded. My wife and I responded. We went there. And now you and I and all law enforcement, we have seen terrible situations.
Right.
I mean, absolutely terrible situations. As a homicide detective, I went to autopsies. None of that ever bothered me.
Right.
So when I asked the doctor, I want to be in here when you're, treating him, the doctor said, well, yeah, I think that'll be all right. Do you know what happened? I passed out. I passed out.
Yeah.
The very first time they hit him with the needle, I was gone, just like that.
Right.
And I think those are the kind of things that come roaring back to you, from these situations.
Right.
Well, Tim, listen.
It's more personal. I mean, it's personal.
And I think it manifests itself.
Yeah, and the homicides and other situations, you compartmentalize because you don't want to pass out at every call you go on, every shooting you go on. But when it personally affects you and your family, that's where it's a completely different structure of how it affects you. And
you're seeing it in a whole different light.
Right.
And trying to compartmentalize it, as you just said, becomes almost impossible. You may have been able to do it had you not been dealing with these things over the course of time and suppressing any feelings you have. Like the worst calls that I've ever had to deal with involve children.
Yeah.
And suppressing those feelings are really, really tough. And, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, but maybe some of that was what caused my reaction when I went in there with my son. I don't know. But yeah, Tim, it has been absolutely great talking to you. I wish you all the luck in the world on what you're doing. We need to get you to our conference, and we'll be talking to you about that.
Okay, I'd love to.
I think it's really great that you're training all these officers and getting out there and conducting Project Lifesaver, which I know you've been a big proponent, and we appreciate that. In fact, y'all are one of the oldest member organizations we have since 2003. So again, thank you and have a great day. And if I can ever be of service, you know where I am. Please don't hesitate.
I won't, Chief. Thank you so much for having me on. And if anybody's interested in contacting me, you can go to my website. It's a-betterunderstanding.com. You have to put the hyphen in there, but I would love to talk to you and share whatever, help you with what's going on. But I appreciate everything you've done, Chief, and thanks for having me on the show.
That was my next question, how to contact you. Thanks for jumping in there with that.
Yeah, or you can contact me. I've got email. It's aawareness12@yahoo.com, aawareness12@yahoo.com. Please don't hesitate to contact me.
And I urge all of our listeners and viewers to do that. If you want some really beneficial training or just get some great consultation, I urge you to reach out to Tim and talk with him. Thank you for being with us today. You have been listening to Deploying High with Chief Gene Saunders, founder and CEO of Project Lifesaver International. Thanks, and we look forward to seeing and talking with you again. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Deploying High podcast with Chief Gene Saunders, brought to you by Project Lifesaver International. Deploying High would like to thank all of our supporters across the country and around the world. If you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe to our channel, make a donation, and don't forget to tell a friend about us. All proceeds from the Deploying High podcast go to support Project Lifesaver International, online at projectlifesaver.org, the original 501c3 nonprofit organization.